welcome to the 17th episode of Toke Signals TV, where we bring you the biggest in cannabis and hemp news stories every week. I'm your host, Steve Elliott. I edit tokesignals.com, and I'll be guiding you through the news this week. First, let's look at our bud pick of the week. This is some very pretty amnesia haze, and it was grown by a good friend of mine named Farmer Tom. And there's a little bit of a story behind this last night. Our first story tonight has to do with a Liquor Control Board public meeting, and this was handed to me inside that meeting of the Liquor Control Board. That's an amusing little sidelight on this particular strain here. You'll see just to the right there some extract from Northwest Connoisseur, and that is some Nucun extract, N-U-K-U-N, very effective, and that is our good medicine of the week. Let's do the news, shall we? As I mentioned, our first story is Washington Liquor Control Board wanted medical marijuana feedback, and they got it. Last night, I saw a very energized Washington medical marijuana community. By the hundreds they came from all over the state. Some of them drove more than 3 hours to be there. They came from the coast, from the mountains, from the fields of eastern Washington, the urban canyons of Seattle. The patients came to speak the truth, many of them on crutches or in wheelchairs. Why was all this necessary? Well, because the Washington State Liquor Control Board, put in charge of recreational marijuana by legalization measure I-502, has now been given control of medical marijuana as well by the Washington legislature. Sometimes it seems as if these public feedback, quote unquote, meetings of government officials and bureaucrats are completely obligatory, and they'd really be just fine with nobody showing up at all. When it comes to taking feedback on the horrible medical marijuana recommendations recently released by the Liquor Control Board, that may be why there was only one public feedback meeting for the entire state. That meeting was held last night, Wednesday night, November 13th, in Lacey, Washington, in a room designed to hold 450 people. At least 600 patients showed up for it. None, not one, of the numerous patients who spoke supported the Liquor Control Board's recommendations. Surprise, surprise, one drug rehab counselor did. Judging by the demeanor of the government officials who were present, they'd rather have been almost anywhere else last night, and considering their recommendations, I don't blame them. This was a raucous meeting, and it was filled with emotional patient testimonies about the medical efficacy of cannabis and the insanity of eliminating the ability of patients to legally grow their own. One thing became very clear. The Liquor Control Board may have slated us for destruction as a community, but we will not go quietly. Think about it for a moment. When a group of probably 5 or 6 policy wonks hammered out these recommendations in a brainstorming session, not one patient was included. Not one recommending physician who authorizes patients for cannabis was included or even consulted. Is it any surprise then that the recommendations they came up with have very little to do with the day-to-day realities faced by seriously ill medical marijuana patients? In any event, the members of the Liquor Control Board who were present for the meeting, along with one each from the State Department of Health and the Department of Revenue, can no longer claim ignorance when it comes to the devastating impact of their recommendations, because they got an earful about it Wednesday night. Chief among the problems patients found with the recommendations was the proposal to stop patients from growing their own cannabis, which they've been allowed to do for 15 years now, since Washington voters approved the state's medical marijuana law back in 1998. Patient after patient, many of them facing end-stage chronic illnesses and limited incomes, told the board that without the ability to grow at home, they just couldn't afford the volume of medicine needed. So many patients signed up to speak during this 3-hour meeting that the board ended up selecting names at random from the sign-up sheet. I was lucky enough to be one of the patients called up to the front. I made the best of my allotted 2 minutes.
Hi, my name is Steve Elliott. I do tokesignals.com. As for the recommendations, I see several major problems. The biggest one that I have to mention first, no home grow, is a major problem. Now, when I think about the 5 or 6 people in a room brainstorming that came up with these recommendations, I have some questions, and the biggest one of those is, how did that group not include a patient? How did that group not include a recommending doctor that gives these medical marijuana authorizations? Let me tell you, these recommendations are not based in reality for those reasons. After 15 years of home growing, why did it suddenly become a problem to let patients grow their own medicine? There's no medical reason. It's the profit motive. You tell us that it's not efficient to have 2 systems of marijuana. Well, look, we're chronically ill here. We're sorry that's inconvenient for you and that's not efficient, but maybe we're chronically ill here. We're sorry that's inconvenient for you and that's not efficient, but maybe we don't want to be a part of your profit-making scheme. The United States Department of Justice has expressed absolutely no interest in busting individual patients. So when you tell us you're concerned about federal guidelines, that is a smokescreen. The federal government has expressed disinterest in busting individual patients. They're not interested in going after us. It's the profit motive. Don't give us that federal guideline stuff. They are not interested in individual patients. We have low-income patients with no access if you cut out home growing. We have rural patients with no access if you cut out home growing. And then if they try to drive to the store to get it, you're going to bust them for 5 nanograms per milliliter. And we hear the health department out here telling us, no, these people don't have real intractable pain. Who the heck are you? I live with this real intractable pain every single day of my life. How can you tell me I don't feel that? Thank you very much.
Just remember, folks, we don't have a lot of time.
Letting the board and the Department of Health official present in no uncertain terms that it is not okay to remove patient growing rights, and it is not okay to impugn the honesty of chronic pain patients by casting them as fakers who just want to get high. Were the board members listening? Will it make any difference at all in the final version of their recommendations, which they'll give to the legislature to act upon in the 2014 session? That remains to be seen. But what can no longer be questioned after Wednesday night's meeting is that Washington's medical marijuana community is united in its strong opposition to these recommendations, and this fight will not be over until the right of patients to be self-sufficient with their medical cannabis through either home growing or collective gardens is no longer threatened. Moving on to the next story. In the United States, federal officials have no viable legal challenge to marijuana legalization, admits the Deputy Attorney General. Now, the U.S. Justice Department doesn't have a viable legal basis on which to challenge the marijuana laws in Colorado and Washington, both of which legalized. Deputy Attorney General James Cole admitted on Sunday. It would be a very challenging lawsuit to bring, Deputy Attorney General Cole said, while testifying at the first congressional hearing on cannabis legalization in those 2 states. Cole said that simply repealing state penalties for growing, possessing, and selling marijuana does not create a positive conflict with the Uniform Controlled Substances Act. He argued that the feds would be on firmer legal ground if they tried to preempt state licensing and regulation of cannabis businesses, which are newly legal under state law. But the Deputy Attorney General said that approach would mean that if such litigation were successful, it would leave the industry unregulated. That's why the Department of Justice decided on the approach summarized in the memo Cole issued on August 29, limiting federal enforcement to cases that involve 8 federal concerns, including sales to minors, drugged driving, and diversion of marijuana to other states. We have reserved quite explicitly the right to go in and preempt at a later date, Cole said, summarizing the DOJ's policy as trust but verify. This was a mess, Senator Sheldon Whitehouse, Democrat of Rhode Island, said at Sunday's hearing. White House welcomed Cole's memo as a clarification of the Obama administration's inconsistent policy on medical marijuana, which started by assuring state legal suppliers that they didn't have to worry about federal prosecution, followed by letters from U.S. attorneys who said complying with state laws wouldn't protect anyone but patients. As long as they are not violating any of the 8 federal priorities, the federal government is not going to prosecute them, Cole said. But if those 8 priorities don't make for a viable prosecution, he added, U.S. attorneys might still decide to target state legal cannabis businesses for other unspecified reasons, as indicated in the last sentence of his memo. And I quote, "Nothing herein precludes investigation or prosecution, even in the absence of any one of the factors listed above, in particular circumstances where investigation and prosecution otherwise serves an important federal interest." That's how the memo equivocates what it had just said earlier. Now, Deputy Attorney General Cole claimed that this catch-all is not meant to swallow the entire memo. That's a quote. But the fact is that language leaves federal prosecutors with a leeway to prosecute almost anyone whom they wish, even in legal states. Causing additional concern is the fact that several U.S. attorneys in states with legal, medical, or recreational marijuana have already said the new federal directive will have no effect on their choices of whom to prosecute. Besides seeming to promise restraint on the part of federal prosecutors, Cole also said the DOJ is working with federal banking regulators to address banks' fear of working with marijuana businesses, which are currently forced to operate on a cash-only basis because financial institutions don't want to incur federal wrath by accepting their deposits. We agree it is an issue we need to deal with, Cole said in response to a question from Senate Judiciary Committee Chairman Patrick Leahy, Democrat of Vermont. There is a public safety concern when businesses have a lot of cash lying around, he said. Cole denied that the Drug Enforcement Administration had warned armored car services not to do business with cannabis sellers. The DEA was merely asking questions of the armored car companies, he said, as to what their practices are. He added that the questions came before his August 29th memo. The Deputy Attorney General said the inability of marijuana businesses to deduct expenses on federal tax returns would have to be fixed by Congress through legislation. In Michigan this week, legislators are proposing selling medical marijuana through pharmacies. Some lawmakers there want medical marijuana legalized by state voters 5 years ago to be sold through drugstores. They say it's time to bring cannabis into the fold of the healthcare industry so patients can buy it at the corner pharmacy. And that's Senator Roger Kahn, a Republican from Saginaw Township. He and others are backing a bill approved by a state Senate committee last week, which would prepare the way for so-called pharmaceutical-grade cannabis sales. Now, this measure would create a second system of access to medical marijuana in Michigan, one that its backers say would not interfere with the existing law, under which patients can grow their own cannabis or obtain it from designated caregivers. Now, of course, the patients in Washington state would be quick to warn you about a second system promised to not interfere with safe access, since that's not been the case with I-502 legalization here. Safe access to medicinal cannabis has been iffy in Michigan since the state Supreme Court made a decision which effectively declared dispensaries illegal by ruling they weren't covered in the Michigan Medical Marijuana Act. Marijuana, if it's to be medical marijuana, should be held to the standard of medical safety, dosage predictability, said Senator Kahn, who is a cardiologist. Our medical marijuana law does neither of those, he claimed, yet it uses the word medical predominantly or prominently in its claims. Kahn is sponsoring the legislation now on the Senate floor to move cannabis from a Schedule I drug, where it resides with heroin and other drugs with high risks and no medical value, to a Schedule II drug like cocaine and morphine that are considered addictive but also medically useful. That reclassification could occur without federal approval. That would lay the groundwork for pharmacies to dispense cannabis in Michigan. The proposed legislation would create enhanced cannabis cards different from those already carried by 129,000 patients in Michigan. How long until the state would declare only the enhanced cards are valid, of course, is a legitimate source of concern. To get an enhanced card, patients could not have been convicted of a drug offense. What exactly does that have to do with a medical condition? One can't help but wonder. They would have to surrender their current Michigan medical marijuana program card, and they'd have to be at least 18 years old. Suppliers and participating pharmacies will be subject to yearly inspections by the state. Critics of the bill are suspicious of efforts to corporatize cannabis cultivation. It doesn't help allay those suspicions that Prairie Plant Systems Incorporated, which has been the official supplier of medical marijuana to the Canadian government for 13 years, is supporting the legislation. Its Michigan subsidiary, Subterra, wants to grow marijuana in an abandoned copper mine on the Upper Peninsula. If you're able to grow in your basement, there's no reason to go to Walmart, said Rick Thompson, spokesman for the patient advocacy group Americans for Safe Access Michigan, which fears patients could be forced into the new system. You have to eliminate home-based competition in order to get a large gross to be financially solvent, Thompson said. That's not what we voted for in 2008. According to Thompson, lawmakers only need a simple majority to send the bill to Governor Rick Snyder's desk, rather than the 3/4 support required in both the House and Senate to amend the 2008 law. In the Tennessee legislature this week, we have a lawmaker drafting a bill to re-legalize hemp there in the volunteer state. He wants to bring hemp farming back to Tennessee, and he's drafting a bill that would do exactly that. State Senator Frank Nicely, a Republican from Strawberry Plains, Tennessee, said the key to success in educating his colleagues about the differences between industrial hemp and marijuana and the economic benefits to farmers. Hemp is used in the manufacture of plastics, insulation, and paper, and hemp seeds are used to supplement protein and omega-3, 6, and 9 essential fatty acids. Hemp clothes, shoes, and purses sell briskly in the United States, but growing hemp is illegal in the U.S. because lawmakers wrote the marijuana laws to include even low THC varieties of industrial hemp. All of those hemp products, therefore, have to be imported from countries like China and Canada that don't have such silly marijuana laws, including hemp. The biggest fear of other lawmakers in the Tennessee legislature, according to Senator Nicely, is if they support hemp, people will think they support marijuana. That's a cousin of hemp, but cornbread is a cousin of moonshine, Senator Nicely said. Republican Representative John Lundberg of Bristol, Tennessee, remains unconvinced. He also bemoans the federal hoops to jump through, with marijuana considered a Schedule I controlled substance, and he claimed farmers in his district are not clamoring for the right to grow hemp. Representative Lundberg's opinions aside, agricultural researcher Dharma Pichai at Tennessee State University is excited about the idea. He said Tennessee is ideal for industrial hemp production, and he said the varieties used to produce rope, fabric, and other industrial hemp products are easily distinguished from marijuana. Pichai pointed to the resistance of hemp to pests and weeds and for its ability to enrich the soil, making it an ideal choice for crop rotation. Pichai estimated that hemp farmers in Tennessee could expect a return of $250 to $300 per acre. Law enforcement officials in the state are aware of Senator Nicely's effort to legalize hemp, but have so far stopped just short of voicing an official opinion. Many sheriffs are wary of the idea, according to Franklin County Sheriff Tim Fuller, but are reluctant to comment before the bill is finished. I can tell you that it will be discussed, said President David Moore of the Tennessee Association of Chiefs of Police. I have just got to do some more research, he said. The Drug Enforcement Administration, meanwhile, isn't amused. Any person who grows marijuana without a DEA registration is committing a felony violation of the Controlled Substances Act, huffed spokeswoman Dawn Dearden, apparently a real charmer. The thing about those DEA registrations, by the way, is since the inception of the Drug Enforcement Administration, they never have given one. The only place allowed in the United States to grow marijuana by the DEA is at the University of Mississippi in Oxford. There are no other DEA licenses to grow marijuana. Anyway, back in Tennessee, their northern neighbor, Kentucky, at the request of police there, their state attorney general in Kentucky issued a September letter saying that farmers who grow industrial hemp could face potential criminal liability and the possible seizure of property by federal or state law enforcement agencies. But according to Tom Murphy of Vote Hemp, states that lift their bans on industrial hemp production will be a step ahead of the game if the federal government changes its policy. Any state that has legislation in place would get a jump on other states, Murphy said. Since they have everything in place, if that were to change on the federal level, they could be off the ground and running in the first year. In California, the Los Angeles County Sheriff has cut ties with a pastor there after learning that he rents to a pot dispensary. A Christian pastor who's getting paid more than $100,000 a year by the LA Sheriff's Department has been sent home with pay after it was revealed he owns a strip mall where a medical marijuana dispensary is located. Bishop Edward R. Turner, who has worked as a paid field deputy for Sheriff Lee Baca and headed the sheriff's multi-faith clergy council for 14 years, is being investigated for his connections to a medicinal cannabis access point, which is housed in a mall he owns. He was relieved of duty today and assigned to his home with pay, said Sheriff's Department spokeswoman Steve Whitmore on Wednesday. Whitmore confirmed an internal affairs investigation has started. Reverend Turner was relieved of duty by Sheriff Baca on Thursday after the department learned from KABC Channel 7 about the revocation of Turner's Foundation's nonprofit status and that a medical marijuana dispensary is being operated on his property, according to Whitmore. Whitmore said Reverend Turner owns 2 strip malls in LA, and one of them has a medical marijuana dispensary as the tenant. The city of Los Angeles has deemed dispensaries to be illegal, Whitmore sniffed. Public records show Reverend Turner owns a property that's also the listed address for Manchester Caregivers. That's a medical marijuana dispensary that has in its product line brownies, pot-infused fudge cookies, ice creams, THC candies, and smoking accessories to those who have California medical marijuana cards. The investigation has also taken a look at the operations of Reverend Turner's nonprofit foundation, Helping Our People Excel for Life Foundation, Hope for Life. Reverend Turner's foundation failed to file any tax returns for 3 years, according to charity records. They'll be looking at the foundation, which lost its nonprofit status for failure to file taxes, and they'll be looking at his prayer breakfast as well to see if they were put on appropriately, Whitmore said. Now, it makes me wonder, what exactly is Whitmore alleging here? Were they doing bong rips at the prayer breakfasts? Anyway, Reverend Turner is still getting a salary, about $100,000 a year, because the investigation is still in its early stages, and there have been no charges and no arrests, according to Whitmore. This is a senior aide to the sheriff, so this will move as quickly as it can, Whitmore said. And at its conclusion, we will announce what we have found and take the appropriate action. We learned this week that in Ohio, the marijuana eradication program there costs taxpayers $500,000 a year. Ohio's marijuana eradication program pulled up 20,747 cannabis plants from fields this year. That's down from a record high of 84,660 plants back in 2010. Law enforcement officials claim the drop is due to a combination of increased enforcement and indoor growing. Predictably, Scott Duff, supervisor at the Ohio Bureau of Criminal Investigations, claimed the 500,000 boondoggle is having an impact. Now, marijuana is found in small patches, more spread out, he said. Most of the $500K per year goes to pay for the helicopter and pilot. The money comes from a federal DEA grant. There were only 27 arrests statewide for marijuana cultivation in Ohio last year, according to DEA's figures. Law enforcement authorities claim it is almost impossible to identify who planted the marijuana. Cannabis advocates call the eradication program a waste of money. Law enforcement would be better off focusing on hard drugs and prescription drug abuse, according to Tanya Davis of the Normal Women's Alliance. An interesting survey in the United States this week. Americans say off-the-clock marijuana use should not get you fired. Overwhelmingly, Americans believe, almost 2/3 of them, that it's unacceptable for companies to fire employees for off-the-clock marijuana use in states where it is legal, according to this new poll. According to the poll taken by HuffPost YouGov, that's the same percentage that said it would be unacceptable to fire employees for drinking during their off time. So we have reached a certain threshold of acceptance now, equal to that of using alcohol in our off time. That's a very interesting fact there. This new poll shows that 64% of Americans think that if marijuana were legal in their state, it would be unacceptable to fire an employee for toking up during his or her free time. Only 22% said it would be acceptable to dismiss them for toking off the job. That's identical to the percentage saying it would be unacceptable to fire an employee for drinking off the job, with 64% saying it would be acceptable, 22% saying it would be unacceptable. How about in states where marijuana isn't yet legal? In that case, when simply asked whether it would be unacceptable to fire an employee for smoking marijuana during off hours, not mentioning the legality of cannabis, 45% said it would be unacceptable and 32% said it would be okay. Republican respondents, interestingly, to this poll were the most likely to base their answers on whether cannabis was legal. 41% of them said that it would be just fine to fire an employee for using marijuana, compared to 32% who said it would not be acceptable. That changes big time, though, if using marijuana is legal. Then 62% of Republicans say it would be unacceptable to fire an employee for pot use, and just 27% say it would be okay. 51% of respondents under age 30 said it would be unacceptable to fire employees for marijuana use, regardless of legality. In a situation where cannabis is legal, a majority of all respondents in all age categories said it would not be okay to fire someone for smoking pot. Most likely to say such a dismissal would be unacceptable was the 45 to 64 age group, the baby boomers, with 73% saying it would not be okay and 18% saying it would be acceptable. Now, despite the unpopularity of firing employees for using legal cannabis off the job, courts have continued to uphold the practice. The Supreme Courts of California, Oregon, and Washington have all ruled that the legalization of medical cannabis on the state level doesn't prevent employers from firing workers for off-the-job use. Similar court challenges are still pending in other states, including Colorado and Michigan. Before we go, let's take a look at one don't miss story this week that I believe you will find interesting and amusing. Dude, check out my 1970s weed rolling paper collection. I've loved the culture of cannabis for a long time now, and not long after I first started smoking weed back in 1977, I started collecting rolling paper packs and kept adding to the collection for roughly the first decade of my stonerdom. I took pictures of some of my best packs in the collection, and you can see those in the article. Check out my 1970s rolling paper collection. I hope you have a wonderful week. I hope you choose to stay lifted. I think I'm going to do exactly that right now with some of Farmer Tom's Amnesia Haze. Have a great week.